Just thinking about it. Hello everyone and welcome back to, I forgot where we were for a second, the Slow Games Club, the book club for games. I'm your host Jazeena. You are stuck with me every month for the rest of the year, talking to amazing devs about their games. Before we get to the main event, Julia, do you want to reintroduce yourself?
My pleasure. Hi, I'm Julia Minamata. I'm a solo indie game developer. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I released my first game, The Crimson Diamond, which is a cozy mystery adventure game, just this last August. And thanks for having me again, Jazz.
Woohoo! I'm gonna miss you next week. I don't think you're
Yeah.
here next week. I'm gonna miss you. And the main event, no pressure. From White Paper Games. Pete, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, cheers. So I'm Pete Bottomley. I'm the studio head and design director at White Paper Games. We're a game development studio based in Manchester in the UK. We've been going since 2012, 13-ish years. And we've released 3 titles since then, and we do a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, here to chat narrative games. So thanks for having me along.
It is a pleasure having you. I played the right game last month. Last month I played the wrong one.
I saw that.
I played the right one. Woohoo! So this month we have all been playing, and I've been saying this like differently every time. Dahlia View. And Pete, this is the time where I get you to tell us, what the game is. But it doesn't need to be the PR version. It can be whatever version you like.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting point just straight out the gate there, where we have these discussions internally. Do we call it Dahlia? Like, we think of our Western audience and Eastern audience. Like, how are people even searching these games on Steam? Because the way you say it, you may be searching the wrong thing, because we had the same thing with our first game, Ether 1, where a lot of people might call it Ether 1, and they're trying to spell it. Like, it's a serious thing where we have these conversations internally. So it's just interesting that you bring that up. But yeah, our game, the way I think about game design and the way we make our games is, this is just my perspective. Everyone on the team has different perspectives, but I always see our games as a reaction to our last game and what we felt we could double down on and change, and just like we're constantly like thinking about the thing that we did last and how we want to change direction based on what we're seeing there. So Dahlia View is more of a detective thriller, very narrative driven. Our studio is known for kind of cinematic and narrative performance, the voice direction and animation specifically on that. And we just love building these worlds where, it has the characters feel like they have backstory, and there's a lot of environmental storytelling going on there. So our first game, Ether 1, was more walking simmy, and that was back in 2014, and that was kind of the boom of the walking sim genre. And because the walking sim was so, we had branching narratives and things like this. We had like alternate things you could find, but it was essentially just a story that was more puzzle based in nature. And so by playing this kind of linear game, and we were like testing, and these kind of games can get a little bit fatiguing. So then for our second game, when you're testing, not when you're developing, but for our second game, then we made more of an immersive simmy style game. So a complete reaction from the walking sim genre to the immersive sim, where it's more systemic and emergent gameplay. Now that was a whole load of fun, and we had so much fun making that. But then from that, again, that reaction point, it was like we just wanted to tell a way more streamlined story, and we wanted to like pull you through the experience and just have you almost on the rails. It's not super linear Dahlia View, but it does have its linearity to it, and we just wanted to have a great, well-paced experience. So that was probably the long, non-PR way of communicating how we think about making games.
No, I loved it. Just from that, you talking about it, 10 different questions have popped into my head, so I have to give myself like 2 seconds to digest everything. But yeah, I think it's really, I just want to do a slight spoiler because of the type of game. We won't talk about at all, obviously, the big spoiler at the end. But I am sorry, everyone watching. There might be slight little spoilers that we talk about naturally. We'll try to avoid them, but just because of how the game works, after playing it, I feel like we would do everyone an injustice if we were too careful, because we want to know the dirty details and the secrets, and you can't do that if I'm trying to avoid too many spoilers. I just thought I would let everyone know. I guess one of my first question, is a lot of people have been talking about they love the characters. So I'm just going to jump in there and ask you, I guess, a bit of a silly question to start off, and then we can get deep into the more technical one. Just who is your favorite character? Just off the back.
It's this way, you're not supposed to pick like a favorite child or something like this.
I knew it would be a difficult question.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not just being diplomatic for diplomatic's sake, but I just feel like you can't just have these characters in isolation. I feel like every character bounces off another character, and that's what makes them interesting. Is that 100%. You see something about one character and find like that like little curveball about another character, and it's just like, oh, that's an interesting take on things. I mean, if you were gonna hold my feet to the fire, I'd say Lady Doa. She's a favorite of mine. But yeah, they're all great, aren't they?
And this is why I asked it. I just so everyone knows, I've watched nearly every single Dev Diary, and there's like 16 episodes. So a lot of the questions I already know the answers to. Lady Doa, for me, she's so lovely. She's like, you know, a fiery nan. You know, she'll make me cookies, but also probably kick my ass. Can I say that on YouTube? Kick my behind. Julia, did you have a character that spoke to you?
That's why I laughed when you said Lady Doer, because I mean, she's got a bit of fire to her, and she's got definitely a very deep past, and there's a lot of loss there, but she's still tough. She's a tough lady. And I think she's a little fun as well. She's funny.
She is really funny. I really liked Mr. Don't laugh at me. I quite like Mr. Levine. I don't know why. He's obviously not a very nice person, but I don't know if it's his accent, right, or the way he's written. I like him.
Yeah, I like him too, because I've always there's something kind of appealing about a character who doesn't care about being liked or not, and they themselves, and even if they know that that's a bit abrasive, and he's not loud and abrasive, he's just quiet and a difficult person, and he's comfortable with that. I find that quite appealing too.
Yeah, I was just going to say I will drop in fun facts and Easter eggs. You might know this from the Dev Diaries. I can't remember if it was in there or not. But the same person that plays Robert Conway plays Harold Levy. So it's the same voice actor who is NJ Apostle, and he's our kind of audio director at the studio. Since day one at the studio, back on Ether One, he's done. He directs the voice actors, does some script writing as well, and does all the audio design and composition in our games. So fun fact for you about those two characters.
I'm shocked, because I was shocked watching the Dev Diaries on when he was doing Conway, just like how his voice changes, and to know, unless I missed it, to know that he'd done Mr. Levy as well. We'll get back to him, because the sound in the game is brilliant. But bringing it back to characters, how difficult do you find it was to get these amazing different personalities, but also kind of making them, because they do feel like they're from the same community, they're all very different, but it's not so different. You're like, how do these people end up living in this area? They're still so, how difficult was that? Talk to me about that process, I guess.
It's not super difficult. Like, we have a lot of design discussions about this. So like, script writing aside, you kind of know who the characters need to be. I don't know what the analogy might be, but just the game kind of just speaks to you in the most high level way. It's just like, oh, we need this type of archetype here and this type of archetype there, and just we need these two people to bounce off each other. And just as you design the levels and the world, you naturally just start building the stories, because you're imagining the space, you're imagining who these characters are. So we we only started doing this maybe on our second game, The Occupation, but we found like the story like the book story framework, who I think is a character designer that used to work at Pixar. And they kind of, the strengths, weaknesses, motivations, aspirations, kind of core traits. We did start kind of with that process on our second game of just trying to figure out, like, we always build backstories, and everyone on the development team is always talking about who these characters are. So even outside of specific lines that are being said, everyone knows who these characters are and their motivations. And even if it's not on the written page, say an artist is art in the world or something like this, they just know these characters' backstories. So it's a very organic process in that respect. So yeah, we find that kind of stuff. I don't know if other teams struggle, but it's not necessarily something we put too much time into, like struggling against, because it just feels so natural in the development.
I'm probably going to answer a very obvious question, and one you've answered many times, but for the benefit of into games and our lovely community. So our main character is Rob Conway, and he's in a wheelchair. And I was just curious about how that decision was made. What was the motivations behind that? Because for me, it was very like I really enjoyed playing as him. When I first started, I was like, oh, I've never played as someone in a wheelchair before. But we'll probably get into this, but the way the world is designed and the movement and how it feels is just 10 out of 10. But yeah, if you could.
Yeah. So we always, we're like, part of a core value and philosophy of the studio is like telling meaningful stories that, leave you with thoughts when leaving the game world. And we just want these people to exist outside of the game almost. So we always start from that perspective. With our first game, Ether 1, it was a game about dementia, and what if, you could restore a loved one's memories. They're looking at you, they're talking to you, but they don't recognize who you are. And we just really doubled down on that aspect. And then, with the occupation, it was way more political. It was about a big act that was being passed, and it was just questioning those gray areas of society. And it's like, we always just want these powerful drives through this game. And just Dahlia View started as that. It was just trying to think of these compelling themes, think about the world that we wanted to tell. And we didn't use it as a direct reference point to begin with, but things like Rear Window by Hitchcock and Stephen King's Misery, just that the game actually started as first person, to go on a slight tangent. Just because, we made a walking sim in first person, we made the occupation in first person. We I don't know, Julia, whether you started prototyping your next game, but almost like when you move to the next game, you almost have these default design assumptions that sometimes you don't question. You just start going into the next thing. And sometimes you have to think, oh, am I just doing this because this is what I know how to do? Or is this the right decision for the game? So the reason why I say this is that the game started as first person, and we just really, I don't know if it was in the dev diaries, but we created this kind of small slice of animation where you're in first person, you're in a wheelchair, and Harold Levy actually walks up to you and it's kind of like the scene in the opening of the game where you go down into the courtyard, there's all the police there, and you're speaking to Tony Morgan at his front door. And that kind of back and forth, Robert's down here and Tony Morgan's up there, and he kind of gets a little bit closer. And we really love that perspective of just being down in the chair and having a person looking over you and communicating with you. And that was an animation test that we actually did with Harold Levy and Robert Conway. And Robert Conway, again, it might have been in the development videos, you might have seen like a wheelchair user going around the environment with no head.
Yeah, it's on my notes.
Yeah, because it was a first-person game. We didn't need a head. We didn't need the bust because it was just all in first person. We had full body awareness. And I remember the day when I was designing Harold Levy's garage, and I just, we use Unreal, so we have visual scripts, and then designers can have pretty powerful tools at their disposal. And I just, put a camera in the corner of the room and kind of just told the game to look through that camera instead of the player's camera. And it just felt so natural. It just felt right. And I remember the day the genre just switched. Okay, this isn't a first-person game. It's a fixed camera game. And again, questioning those default assumptions when moving into a new game design. It's something that we're going through now with our next title, but yeah, I think that's an important thing to kind of really think about, like, what does this game need, rather than, you know, your default assumptions. So
Yeah.
Building on that, I guess from a developer standpoint, was there an instantaneous this is what we need to do, or was there a bit of, even if it was internal only, like a bit of pushback saying like, oh, it's going to be so much more work to reinvent or redesign or refigure out how we're going to make this work in this different perspective?
you know, we're very fortunate, and like again, another core value of our team is that we won't set on like an easier, quicker solution if there's a solution that's just right for the player. It may take longer, it may take more money, it just may take more time. Whatever it is, it's just everyone in the studio, we're very fortunate. They're just like, no, that is the right thing. This is going to be more work, but this is the right thing. And I think when people see that and something clicks, everyone just gets behind it, and everyone doubles down on it. So no, I think it was just, we prototyped it and we're kind of passing the control around. It's just like, this actually feels pretty good, and everyone was just straight into it. Like, yes, now we need to do, you know, the burst, and we need to do all the facial animations and things like this. And it just turns into a different game again. There's a reason why first-person games are quite easy to prototype from an indie perspective. Most of the time, you don't even need a player model. You just need a floating camera with a capsule collision, and you're good to go. And that's why that's quite that you see people prototyping first-person games quite a lot. But yeah, it was extra work, and then all of a sudden we had this third-person camera character that we had to design. But I think everyone was pretty much behind it, Julia, and everyone just saw, you know, what the game needed to be.
That was a brilliant question, Gia. This is why you're here to drag out those troops. In I guess the same themes, talking about, you know, how the game changed. Was there anything else? You know, you start off with, this is the idea of what the game's going to be, that kind of changed, and it's quite shocking. Or it was anything else like that, I guess.
So the boring answer is no, and I'll give you a bit of context behind that. Is that our first game, Ether One, again, I think it's important to see like the larger picture. So sorry, I'm jumping around, but our first game, Ether One, was like this sci-fi third-person action platformer, and it just didn't have its core. And then when we found, Dementia was always part of the story, but it wasn't the story. And then it's like we were trying to tackle all these themes, and it was just a noisy soup of things. And then as soon as we knew what this one thing was that we doubled down on, it became super clear and exactly what we needed to do. However, we bootstrapped that entire games production over 4 years. We spent £37,000 on it, which is probably like $50,000. So you can imagine like 6 people working for 4 years for that much money. That's not, that money does not go far. And we were all like we just put, like, everyone on our team just put their souls into that game, and it was a game that everyone was super passionate about making. Then on the occupation, the kind of you hear these stories a lot, but these immersive sim games that have systems and interactions and emergent gameplay, they can be difficult to figure out, and budgets can scale. And like, again, the development was 4 years, but just for a different reason. The first 4 years for Ether One was because we didn't know how to make a game. The second 4 years, you never quite know how to make a game, but we really didn't know how to make a game. And then the second occupation 4 years were just, it was a complicated game to figure out. And so the reason why I say no to your Dahlia View question is that we just knew what we wanted to execute. We had the game mapped out. Levels didn't change, characters didn't change, like nothing got dropped. It was just super clear production of like 28 months end to end. And we just knew what we wanted to execute on. So that was, when I say from earlier that every game is a reaction to the last game, we knew we didn't want to spend 4 years making a game. We knew we just wanted to ship something really clean, you know, few bugs, as strong as it could be, like a very high quality thing in itself. And that was our mission. So that's what we were trying to like focus on, essentially.
I think it's a really big credit to like the studio as a whole as well, the people that you have within the studio. Sorry, I just got distracted about the a question just popped up, and I'm like, yeah, I'll answer at the end, but sometimes it's more appropriate. So I'm just gonna my multitasking skills are not my friend today. Oh, that's a good see, this is why. Very good question. I'm just gonna jump in and ask that question because it fits with the theme. So Philippe asks, was there anything that you removed from the game because of the project scope, maybe budget, time? Oh my
No,
God.
it was
Wow.
on budget, on time, just
You're
like
gonna have so
Whew.
many devs watching going, can you hire me?
Mhm.
but that it was on the back end of two really big projects that were so challenging in different ways. The first one was challenging because, like I said, we like in a serious way, we didn't know how to make a game, and that was a tough thing to ship. The second one was that we thought we could we had the psychology of the first game of just like brute force. Like you can't just constantly work, 14 hours a day on this thing that you're trying to do and fight. Like everyone was super burnt out after Ether One. And it wasn't an intentional thing. We didn't realize it was happening. It just happened.
Yeah.
And then on the second game, again, we just didn't take that time. Like we became with every game, we've increased the number of team members by 3. So Ether One was made by 6 people, Occupation with 9, Dahlia View with 12, and now we're at 15. Currently working on our next thing. So it's very intentional to do things slowly and just really only bring people onto the team when we have a specific need and people with like really strong skills in certain areas. So we just did not have the structure. We didn't have the leadership. We didn't have those things in place as a studio, and that was the failing from my side, from like the Occupation perspective, where people can't just always just know what's in your mind, and I wasn't clear of the expectations and things like this. So again, coming back to Dahlia View, I feel like we just nailed it from just like a team communication, leadership. Like everyone knew what direction we were going in, and we just, it's a credit to the team because like we executed it exactly how we wanted to. But it's not to say all future games will be like that, but it was a very conscious thing. I think, we could get into some of this in a little bit. I won't spend too much time on this. Feel free to bring it back to this, but I have, for me, failings on Dahlia View from a design perspective, because sometimes I feel like we could have gone deeper in the design, but because we knew we were going to ship on time and on budget, I didn't push back on some of these things that maybe they weren't quite working or something like this. Everything we shipped with, we intentionally, wanted to ship with. We didn't just ship something that we didn't feel was right. But I feel like we could have explored and tried things and thrown things away, but it just wasn't our focus at the time.
Yeah, I feel like you've kind of read my mind in I have the next question kind of I guess picks up on exactly what you were saying. You said every game that you ship you learn from. Learn from. What is like your key takeaways that you learned from making Dahlia View?
Friction is good in that you don't just want everyone to be agreeing all the time. You want to be questioning design decisions. You want to be having creative conflicts. Like the studio is great at this, and not like there's never been a situation where it gets into like a personal territory or anything like this. But just developers having creative disagreements is a healthy, strong thing. And I think it causes people to question things. And I think everyone's great on the team at reflecting. So even if in the moment you're like, no, I don't agree with this because X, Y, and Z, maybe after the call you think, actually, no, I don't agree with that. I should hear what that person was saying because clearly there's an issue with that. And then we just didn't question things enough on Dahlia View because again, we were just like so focused on the end result. And I think we could have explored elements further. But yeah, I think that creative like friction and just questioning things and exploring things, I think that's a power. Like the way I think about it is like you can tell when a team cared about this game that they made. There's just it's so subjective. Like it's like watching a great movie or a book. You can just tell when the production behind it was just so in line and just executed really well. And it's not like hours of the gameplay or the number of mechanics or the number of characters. It's not a metric that you can gauge. You can just feel this team cared about this thing. I think our team does that really well, and it's like a very kind of, you can't put your finger on what it is, but you just sense it from the design, I think.
Yeah, I feel like even playing certain games, especially your game, you can feel when the team love the game. Like you know, you're saying that you can feel it from inside, but even playing the game, when games are a labor of love, it really does come through in how it's played. Jude, did you have anything that you wanted to touch upon?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that feeling of there's so much love and there's so much energy poured into it. I mean, we can get into this in the more when we get more into talking about design, but things like the taps work, you know? The taps don't have to work, but you've made most of the taps work in the game. I know because I tested them, because that's
So
the kind
good.
of person I am. And this idea where this game is so based so much on investigation and looking through objects and everything. The fact that you took the time to render all those objects, even though a lot of them are just, you know, they're not the puzzle object, they're there as something to take a look at and there's no return from it. But the fact that you have to go through that process of some things have something attached to them that's significant and some of them don't, that's what makes that investigation part interesting and rewarding. Because if you picked up everything that and everything was like a puzzle important item or a story important item, then it wouldn't have the same payoff. And the fact that the team had all this energy and love poured into all these little details to make the world realistic, but also the fact that the world and the objects were so well fleshed out really does add to that design of seeking out clues.
Yeah,
That's not a question. That's not a question, but if you could go into that.
Those statements are good.
Yeah, it's an observation that we think about a lot, because like design consistency is very important. It's just like, so then if you're interacting with the taps, what else on this level of interaction is someone expecting to interact with? And so for like, we kind of got this design principle more from the occupation, which was a little bit more stealthy and a little bit more explorative, like where like you could literally, you know, go to a set of blinds and like peel back a single blind to look through it, and you like the world was super tactile in that respect. Now the issue with the tactility is also, you know, if loads of drawers are openable, now an artist has to go and populate all the drawers and the cupboards, and you like, we wanted any kind of like, from a design principle perspective, like in Dahlia View, any of the screen locks that you could enter, like the first person modes, you needed something to pick out from that, whether it's a dialogue queue or like a little pickup, or like, we didn't just want empty screen locks where you're almost like hunting for pixels. And there are things, maybe coming back to that question of what I'd change, like there are sometimes like frustrations with like a camera angle and not knowing where your goal is and the direction to go in, which I think is, maybe it's just a frustration on my side, but I've definitely seen one or two players comment on that kind of stuff. And also just like, we ideally don't want the hunting for pixels thing. So like the design language should be clear enough that this thing looks interactable, this thing doesn't look interactable. And it's a difficult line to draw of where to stop on the interaction. But yeah, we have a lot of fun adding tactility to the environments, and it just, you know, these worlds that we like to design, I just feel like it just gives that extra sense of personality to them.
It was incredibly effective, and I was when you were talking, I was just pointing out my drawers and cupboards in my game here as just recognizing such a kindred spirit in terms of the taps work in my game as well. They don't
Nice.
really need to work, and that you can open and close all the drawers and root around and things. And so when I saw that, I'm like, yes, this is someone who is coming from that same perspective of we must flesh this world out, because this is what the setting is, like the strong point here. So we need to really do that. I wanted to ask actually, Dahlia View, how long did that take to develop? Because you mentioned the length of time for the other games.
Yeah, so 28 months. And that was end to end. That was,
wow.
You know, from starting to shipping. So yeah, it was like, you know, relatively speaking, in terms of how game productions go, yeah, 28 months.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible.
I was gonna wait for natural segue. I just typed it, but I think this is a natural segue. I guess you know, you were talking about everything kind of fit into place, and you were on time and in budget, and it went really well. And it was a part of that development that came together, you know, satisfying in a jeez, man, maybe Julie, do you want to take over in a satisfying way? Is it something that you love seeing together, or something that came together better than you expected? Did I make sense, or did I
Yeah,
completely...
no, it made sense. I'm just trying to, because as you were talking, I was thinking, there's downsides to, because I don't want to misframe it of like, oh, everything was great because it was on time and on budget. So I definitely don't want it to come across as like perfect scenario, because we were trying to set these production rules. So for this game especially, from a production perspective, there's always strange terminology in development teams, and every development team will use different language in terms of how far along are you in production. You could use alpha, beta, gold, or whatever, and that's not super clear because everyone has different expectations about what that is, and you always need to write down what alpha means per project and per studio. Some people call it like first pass, second pass, final pass, but it's like, if it's first pass but it's been iterated on a bunch, is it still first pass, or is it whatever it ends up being is like not very clear terminology. And so where I'm going with this is that, again, we took tips from Pixar's approach in terms of animation, where they say, okay, this is layout, staging, blocking, and polish. And so there's 4 layers in these animated productions. And so that's how we communicate now since Dahlia View, and even on our current projects, where we just say, is it L1, L2, or L3, or L4, which is, layout, staging, blocking, and polish. And it's terminology that the whole team can get behind. And we know just by saying, I'll get this L1 to you by the end of the day, that it's going to be this type of asset, regardless of department. So the reason why that's important is that when it came to L4 and there were things incorrect with the game, because we had set these kind of production processes, if it's just like, oh, we need some more set dressing over here, or we need some more grime over here, we just didn't have capacity in the budget for it. And you could argue that, would the player even notice this? Is this us being too close to our game? And it's a good cutoff valve to say, if you didn't think about it 2 months ago, why is it a thing now? But there's also that thing, sometimes you see things later on that kind of you want to change and you feel like you know more about. Difficult dichotomy, very, very difficult. To answer your actual question about things then that you think came out well, I mean, it was my first time actually doing cinematography. So on the occupation, I had done the cinematics, the set pieces, but there was only maybe, I don't know, I'd have to go back and count, but like maybe there was 6 short cinematics over like in total 4 or 5 minutes long. I don't remember them being longer. Probably they are longer, but they weren't as in depth as Dahlia View. So Dahlia View had a lot of camera work, a lot of cinematics, a lot of fixed camera angles as well as cinematic camera angles. So that was kind of my first foray into cinematography. I've always liked cinematography, but I actually putting it in a commercial product, as you'd want to call it, I'd never done that before. So pretty happy. Again, I newer stuff I think is even better, but it's all learning.
I really do like, if anyone's like really interested, like when I watched the Dev Diaries, watching how the cinematics, how it worked, and how you went from the I'm going to get the wrong way around, first to third person, and when you were talking about the cameras, I found that really, really interesting and really, really detailed. And even listening to you talk about, I know you said you had an interest in it before. I wouldn't have known that this is your first commercial dabble into. Well, it wasn't a dabble, you executed it, but you know what I mean. I wouldn't have known. I think as you can see, I like to big up great work. So yeah, I'll spend that half an hour going, I think that was great. And Philippe in the comments loved it and thought it was very cinematic, and it generally was. It did feel like playing, I guess, a movie game. There's probably a better terminology for that. Julia, obviously there's a lot of back and forth. This is your time to shine. Is there any questions that you are dying to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just mentioned, we went back to cinematic just now, and you mentioned earlier on, Pete, that Rear Window, of course. Although you mentioned it was not like the initial inspiration for the game, which I kind of find fascinating. What was the initial inspiration for the game?
So again, tough to answer, and I'll try and not do it in such a roundabout way. But essentially, we try not to just say, here's the market, here's the target audience, like this is the game. like there's an argument to say that players don't know what they want to play until you've created it. You have to be like, I think more so than anything now, we're more aware of the market and who's going to play this game and think about this. So we are discussing those things, but I don't think the initial seed or inspiration should come from that perspective. I think once you've got that initial seed, then make sure you're designing for the target audience of who that is. So I don't think it should come first. So that's to say that you know, art have a certain visual style that they want to hit, or the character artist has a certain style that they want to make the characters in. I have certain design principles that I want to try and do. You know, audio, animation, code, all these different departments. We kind of put these ingredients into a pot, for want of a better phrase, and we then just try to figure out the game that everyone's most interested in creating. So it's not, we don't have just one central kind of creative thing like, this is the game we're making, here's the game design document, let's go and do it. It's not like that. It's that we try to bring each department's interest in the direction. So yeah, I actually hadn't watched Rear Window. So this definitely was in the dev diary, but from an art direction perspective, I know Oliver Farrell, who was the art director, was very interested in an animated film called The Illusionist. So not the Ed Norton Illusionist. There's like an animated Illusionist. I think it's French animation, and that was an original starting point there. And we I think pretty quickly, some people on the team watched Rear Window, but I just didn't want to watch it. Like, I know it's very Rear Windowy, but like, you know, a wheelchair user who is a detective with a camera, I don't think there's any way the way it's not going to feel Rear Window. So it wasn't a super heavy inspiration from my perspective. I think Misery was an interesting starting point in terms of how we want the player to feel if they don't have mobility with their legs, and that was kind of an interesting direction for us to explore. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other inspirations, but that was definitely the initial starting points.
Yeah, when you mentioned that the way that you iterated, like, well, you started the way you originated the game design, I'd never heard that approach before, where you get all the different departments to like weigh in on like what they would be excited on doing specifically. And I think that's a great way, to make sure that people are excited about what they're working on, because it's kind of partly
Yep.
the idea, which is incredible.
Yep.
As well, it's also an amazing achievement that your studio has, gone on through these years. And you said you've only added very small numbers of people for each game, and I'm getting the feeling that people tend to stick around at your studio. Is that and I think that is also incredible, because everyone gets more used to working with each other, and they know how each other works, and that aspect of game development goes even more efficiently. That's also not a question, so I'm just saying that's
Well,
very interesting, that approach that you have for game development.
Yeah, it's a pro and a con, and like again, coming back to core values of the studio, we have a value like, you know, ideas should be shared regardless of seniority. Like the person that started last week, if they have a great idea and everyone's like, that's a good idea, that's the thing that goes in. So we're always in shared team discussions and debates, and so that's a really important thing for the studio. But yeah, in terms of having that team and the people around the game, I think you're right, Julia. It creates buy-in from the team. Everyone gets excited about the thing that we're all working on. And I think it's, you know, more so now we've really started getting clear about articulating the pillars. So there'll be like game pillars that are like, these are the things that we're trying to hit. But then there'll be department specific pillars where everyone knows what art is trying to achieve, everyone knows what design is trying to achieve, so that you can reference that when you're giving a different department feedback. It's just like they can say, I hear your feedback, but these are the pillars that we established, and that would conflict with these pillars. And it just gives us kind of a language to communicate with. Now, you do definitely get development efficiencies. I was going to go down a rabbit hole of actual code and stuff like that.
We love your rabbit holes.
I'll stay out of that one for now. The thing that I was gonna say in terms of your specific question as well, Julia, about maybe the terminology. Sometimes it might be harder for, like, I think we do a good job, and We make sure we communicate with new members of the team, and we have like one-on-ones, and just make sure everyone feels engaged with the work. But you can slip up and start using terminology where someone's like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. And there's always going to be that level of onboarding, especially when you kind of build in momentum as you're developing the team. So the people that were there on day one, 13 years ago, there's always going to be that compounding knowledge. But I think we do a good job at making everyone feel like they're kind of part of the team. But that could be a stumbling block as well, for newer developers on the team.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. My questions are kind of scattershot, so I'm sorry if I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. But you also touched upon this idea of this tactility in the game, where you have to drag the mouse to like open, turn levers and all these push buttons and open drawers and things. And this extends naturally to that lock picking mini game that's in the game.
Oh, it's amazing, by the way.
I wanted to ask, first of all, it took me a little while to figure it out, but I felt so smart once I figured it out. My question is, so what that type of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a lock picking mini game, but what type of mini game that's integrated in other games do you really enjoy in other games?
Ooh. That is a great question.
I think, to use the phrase that I feel like I've said 2 or 3 times now, is like the emergent gameplay. I just love like Dishonored and Prey and these kind of games where you have these core mechanics that can be used in combination with other mechanics. So I'm thinking like, the whatever that I'll give it the technical name of splatter gun from Prey, like that gun that you can use to shoot onto the wall and you can kind of platform with it, and it creates platforms, but also like freeze enemies on the spot, and it's like, or like unlock a door, or like there's these mechanics with like multiple outcomes, like the emergent gameplay. And it's just interesting to see how people combine that stuff together. I'm not the kind of person that plays Dishonored multiple times and tries to unlock every secret. I'm generally the player that I've played this once. I know there's a bunch of different things, but like that was my story and my playthrough through that thing. So I know there's a bunch of other options and ways to do the game, but yeah, I think it's anything that's like emergent and systemic from that perspective, I think, are the things that I enjoy the most. Which Dahlia View is not in any way. So if people are expecting a systemic and emergent game from Dahlia View, it is not that.
It's wonderful to just see how things can work together in ways you might not expect. Going back to Robert Conway and the fact that he is in a wheelchair, from a level design perspective, I found that very interesting, because what it does is it restricts the areas that you can go to in a very natural way. And then seek out different lifts and everything. You can't go up the stairs. And not only that, but from a narrative perspective, it also a lot of people don't have that as an issue, that type of mobility issue, but it causes you to empathize with people who have that in real life, where there are these barriers. And I think that was a really interesting and really compelling way to raise that awareness. That's also not a question, but I mean,
So I'm a kind of level designer by trade. I started, modding Unreal Tournament and just making levels in games. And so like level design is something that's kind of one of those things that I care a lot about. And yeah, the level design was interesting. It was an interesting challenge because, sometimes like verticality in level design is like a thing that I talk about a whole bunch. And so when you have one axis essentially that you can design on, like, well, the X and Y technically too, but you don't have the Z axis for sure, like the vertical axis. So like where you'd normally put, ladders or stairs or anything to kind of break up the gameplay, like the occupations level design, I'm super proud of. Like I love all the interconnected corridors and the vents, and like there's some deep level design going on in the occupation. Whereas Dahlia View, you had to really be mindful about, the play space. I think it was good that it kind of just accidentally turned out this way, but that I was interested in cameras as well as level design, because it allowed me to kind of design spaces where I knew cameras would be going as well. Sometimes it's super awkward. It's just like, we got to fit a camera in here and this isn't the best angle, but it's like, I don't know, like there's a downside to the fixed camera rather than having like a boom arm camera that's following the player that the player can control. The fixed camera aspect in level design was definitely a challenge. But yeah, the verticality, when you don't really have verticality apart from ramps, you can't really put ramps everywhere, just because it didn't feel natural in the setting. And yeah, you're just way more mindful actually when you're walking around in public spaces and you notice there's a curb without even the little ramp. You're just like, how does someone get around if you're a wheelchair user? Like you just start paying attention to everyday things. I think it's with anything. Whenever something is directly impacting your life, you realize the things that you take for granted are just like glaringly obvious for the people that might struggle with something. So yeah, it was definitely a fun challenge to try and overcome with the low design, but I think it was fortunate that I was also kind of trying to map out the cameras at the same time, which definitely helped.
Yeah, I found the level design brilliant, and in chat they loved Mrs. Dower's house, and it was so. And I think you got around, you still added levels, and it was really nice, and it didn't feel forced. And I guess I just kind of like thought of a question. Her husband was also in a wheelchair, and was that planned, or was that to add the chairlift that to go up the stairs? Like
that was. I mean, so it's like backstory versus being planned. It's like as soon as you think there would have been a wheelchair, like a stair lift in this house, you just think that's a great opportunity for some gameplay, and just that whole unlocking it, getting in the chair, seeing Robert out of his chair in another chair, set up the ending in a really nice way as well. Obviously, we won't get into the territory of the ending, but it's like, I don't know, it was nice to, this vehicle almost that you were in for the majority of the game, like being taken out of this and put in a different scenario, and almost like being, bound and constrained to this one thing, but it was moving and you had like free look at just, those are the kind of nice accidents where obviously it's intentional for us to do that, but it was the space telling us that it needed us to do this almost. It wasn't like in a design doc where, now we need to put a stair lift in. It just came out of the environment as we were designing the environment.
Yeah, sorry, Julia, I took your time.
No, not at all. No, this is how we do this. This is how we do. We mix it up. Yes.
Beautiful back and forth.
Yeah. Speaking of like extending out just from that one environment, but just the general setting, Dahlia View is a very specific area. I'm not from the United Kingdom, but if people were like that type of setting, like where can we find that type of living arrangement or set of places, or does it exist?
Yeah, so Dahlia View is loosely based in the northeast, more like coastal kind of shipping dock towns. And we'd like to loosely base, we kind of got this whole concept of a paper verse at the studio where characters that were in Ether 1 take part in the occupation, and people from the occupation might be in Dahlia View, and these characters all live in the same universe. So Ether 1 is around 1940s. It's in a Cornish coastal town in the south of the UK. So very much like a little fishing village, tin mining, cider making. That's Ether 1, more based around Cornwall. Then we've got the occupation, which is northwest, where we're based, which is a mix between Manchester and Liverpool kind of architectures. Then Dahlia View, like I said, northeast. The occupation based in 1980s. Dahlia View 76, was it? I forget no, 56 was
50,
it? 56?
54 or something. Yeah.
I'm
54.
bad at numbers.
Yeah. It's been a while. So like, these games all exist in the same universe, and we like to bring small bits of fiction and Easter eggs and characters over, and they're all kind of loosely based around like a point in the UK, essentially.
Can you expand on any of these Easter eggs that anyone that had played previous games might find or have been to? Or any other little secrets that are hidden in the game? We love a secret.
Well, I have one that I can jog your memory with, Pete. Potentially. I don't know if this is a one or not. But coming from an adventure gaming background, you have a character called Terence Trilby. Was that a reference?
Yeah, NJ put that one in, so I'm not sure how he referenced that. So the audio designer that I was talking to before, I'm trying to think of specific ones. Do you want to elaborate on Terence Trilby, by the way? Because I don't know that reference.
They snuck that one in.
My assumption is that Terence Trilby is a character in Yahtzee Crowshaw's adventure games that he created with Adventure Game Studio, the same adventure game engine I made. So he made a series of about 6 games called the Chizo Mythos that are all point-and-click adventure games. And the character is called Trilby. I don't remember if the character's first name is Terence or not, but definitely Trilby. And I was thinking, is that connection there?
Yeah, so. I'll have to ask him. So
please do.
Put that in there. But like, I think the reason why these things aren't coming immediately to mind is it's just such nice little connectivity that you think in the backstory of like someone that was like in a mine collapse in Ether 1 was then then moved to Turing, which was in the occupation. And so like we just move characters around and send letters back and forth. Oh, so this is one now as we're talking. Yes, I can answer your question now. So there's a postcard on the fridge in Robert Conway's flat that says "Welcome to Pinwheel," and Pinwheel is from Ether 1. So Robert Conway is writing to someone in Pinwheel from Ether 1. So there's one. But yeah, there's going to be a bunch all over the game. They don't come to mind immediately.
I love those. I love those just little like nods and winks at other games, and it kind of tells the story of the studio as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There was another one where there's a bit of reference about Lord of the Rings, the book coming out, and in a couple of the calendars.
Yeah, exactly. That was in Shirley Downes's office. I know it was on that calendar. Maybe Annabelle McKee's office, living room as well, because they're sisters. We did the same in Ether 1. There's a little cinema in Ether 1, and there's a bunch of films coming out that are kind of interesting references. I got a fun Easter egg for you, actually. This is from left field as we're talking about that. So when Ether 1 was coming out, The Last of Us 1 was coming out. And so we had some development friends at Naughty Dog at the time. So there's a poster of Ether 1 in The Last of Us as a film coming out. So that was a nice thing. Because obviously The Last of Us was incredible when it came out, like Game of the Year. So that was a nice kind of nod to Ether 1, our game. So that was nice of them to do that.
That's so lovely. That's that must have been really nice.
It was fun.
Fun
everyone on the team loved Last of Us. Like Last of Us is like, if you ranked just collectively in the studio their top games, Last of Us would be definitely up there alongside like Dishonored and things like this.
And who's the big Lord of the Rings fan then on the team?
I'm not sure, I didn't. I think if I remember those conversations, we were just like in design, we were like trying to think, okay, we've got a calendar and people need to be doing stuff. What things came out around this time? And I think that's what we were looking at. And I think we must have picked the month of the release date and seen that something like this. Generally we find this, like we try to loosely base it on, if we're making a game based in the 1950s, we try and loosely base it around the technology of the 1950s, things like this. We don't try and say super strict and specific, because games are, they have an element of fiction to them, and they should be fun and engaging. You can like loosely bend things, but we do try and base them, roughly around the time that these things are happening.
I don't know if this qualifies as an Easter egg, but something that you can do in the game that's not intrinsic to the actual plot is the stamp collecting. Are there any philatelists in the studio?
Yeah. So we enjoyed doing the stamps. That was again a last minute thing where we're just like, okay, it just makes sense that Robert Conway is collecting these stamps, and we have these like. Again, we have this version in every one of our games. So in Dahlia View, it's stamps. In The Occupation, it's actually tape cassettes that you can find and you can listen to. So one of the security guards in The Occupation is trying to be an actor, and he's like recording these voice demo reels whilst he's working as a security guard, and you can kind of find them and piece together the story. And then in Ether 1, we have something called the Knocker story, which if you were on our YouTube channel, you might have seen the Grumpy Knocker, which is an Ether 1 video which we released. So there's like a story, like a children's story in Ether 1. And we had that as little collectibles through the game as well. So we like doing these kind of fictional representation of just fun things you can unlock in the game if you want to, dig into those kind of things.
I'm away with fairies half the time, so I realized late that the stamps were like collectibles. I just thought it was like, I was like, oh, a bit of evidence. And it was only after I've seen like 3.
From it or something. Yeah.
It's only like once I seen 3, I was like, oh.
There's a lot of stamps around here. Why is everyone leaving stamps everywhere?
Yeah, it took me like embarrassingly, and this is nothing to do with the game design. It's just me being a silly sausage. I notice things in games that are odd, and then sometimes don't notice like the really obvious things. It's a question actually I was wondering as well. I know a lot. No, let me just ask the question. Any particular reasons for choosing the 50s? I was gonna do a spiel about it, and it's late.
Yeah, again, it comes back to that inspiration points of where we think the game should be set, and there was just a lot of interesting reference points. I think mostly from an art perspective. From that point of view, just from when they were looking at The Illusionist, again, that animation, because I know like The Occupation, the 1980s, I think came from NJ when he was wanting to make music for the game. So in The Occupation, it's a fixed time game. So 1 minute in the real world is 1 minute in the game time. So the game takes place over a fixed amount of time. And so we have radio stations that you can turn on and tune into, and there's like talk shows and 1980s pop classics. And he wrote like 20 1980s tracks, which are super catchy. If you check out the Occupation soundtrack, they're all composed internally by NJ. And so we have like actual 1980s hits essentially just in the game. So that's how we got, the year for the Occupation. But I think for Dahlia View specifically, I think it came from the art direction in that respect.
MJ scares me, like genuinely, like I'm scared of his brain in the best ways. I was watching the Dev Diaries, and the way that the themes, so the characters have themes. So like Pete's theme, I'm gonna try and mimic him now. So he's like hopeful. So it's like well, his goes up. Wait, where's my notes? Down, up. So it's like dun 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 dun, and then like his daughters go dun 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 dun, and then it ends with a dun, like and I just think on like the behind the scenes of the amazing brains behind the game is brilliant. And one of my favorite bits is Charlotte May's like theme, I guess, is so she's around 8, and he took the first 8% of an innocent sounding instrument, like a flute, I think it was, and he took the first 8% of it and then stretched it out, and it became this ominous but innocent and wow. This all that to say wow.
So I think just from conversation in the studio, I think it comes from a background. He did an experimental music degree at university, which I think caused him to kind of question why this melody, why are notes used, like why'd you do this? Is there something thematic you can put behind that? I think everyone just tries to think about the game's themes. How can we like physically represent this or audibly represent this in this game world? And so like each department just tries to think about the themes and like how do we spill into this, and just really maybe it does come back to that cohesion. And when we're talking about how can you tell a team cared about these things, your conscious brain probably doesn't notice these kind of things, but maybe on a level your subconscious brain just picks up on them. Not sure, but yeah, it's one that everyone cares enough to do this kind of stuff.
My HR brain is they must just feel so trusted. You must like give this essence of trust, and so they trust that they can have an opinion and that they're safe, and it allows them to be so like exploratory. And I love it. I just like listening to how you talk about your team and watching the dev videos. And it kind of leads me into what I got from dev videos is you made a lot of the game in lockdown. And it just seemed quite sad because everyone was just like, I want to be in the studio. I guess, how did that, I mean, a lot, but what was like the main thing that you noticed about making a game in lockdown? We're asking all the questions, Julia.
No, it's a really good question.
It was strange, but I think it was more from the personal side than anything else. Like, because the team hadn't been together in the same room until we actually released the game, and everyone was in the studio and just like, oh, cool. We're like, we can be together when we released the game. And that was the first time some people had seen each other in person when we released the game, because we had people join the team. Like I said, we kind of grew by 3 people for Dahlia View. So that was an interesting experience. But we were fortunate in, we had the like leadership failures of the occupation that we doubled down on the kind of structure of the studio. So we had, it's building. So there's two kind of things we were thinking about, at least, and I think is useful for studios. It's like creating the scaffolding so that everyone knows there's a framework and a fixed structure in place. But like everyone should have autonomy. Like everyone knows the expectation and the direction. Everyone knows that it's communicated. Okay, how do I contribute to help align with this overall vision? And so everyone has autonomy in that respect. And so I think that helped, when we're, in lockdown or we're working remotely, because everyone was trusted in that respect to kind of say, okay, this is the direction we're going. Here's the North Star. On a super kind of production, kind of geeky level, whatever, if people are interested in this, we started using OKRs at the back end of the occupation, and the OKR production approach has really helped our team and fits with our culture of saying, you kind of set some kind of high level company goals, like this is where the studio's going, and then within a department, the department says, okay, we know where the studio's going. How does like the design department hit those goals? And then from a design department, it's just anyone that's in that design department, they actually write their own task list. No one writes. No, we don't have juices on the team saying, okay, you need to do this task and this task. Nobody waits to get given tasks. People just see the direction we're going. There's no pressure. It's just like, okay, what do you want to contribute to get to this point? So we're not like tracking days or hours, or obviously there's lots of communication going on, but essentially everyone's trying to think of their own workload to help hit, the direction that the studio's going in, which I think helps, give that autonomy, and it gives the kind of structure for people to help people feel supported, so that everyone's not swimming in different directions. And I think that's really helped, moving forward as a studio.
Yeah, that's nice. I just remembered one of the things that I really liked that I want. Again, it's not really a question. It's just one of the things I liked, and I don't even know if it was on purpose, if my brain just comprehended something. So I liked, one of the big mechanics of the game, I guess, is the spying. He's in his window and he's like looking out. I really like that, by the way. It's really cool. But what I also liked is that if I was I found sometimes I'll get distracted because of my lovely ADHD at something that just wasn't relevant. And then I would hear a sound. I'm like, I know I should go, and that sounds on purpose, but I was like, I'll come back to that. And then when I did pan there, like the characters are like on purposely idle. So they will be like doing, like washing up, waiting for you to look at them. And when you look at them, then they do that next scene, and I just I loved it. And again, it's not a question, and maybe you can.
Well, yeah, again, it comes back to a design philosophy where like we didn't just want to like grab hold of the camera and say, look here, this important thing is happening. It's almost like how you'd approach like a stage play, like a theater production or something like this. Like you've got different people doing different things, and like at certain beats you want to bring the audience's attention over here or over here. And so to use the terminology that we use internally, it's like we have these holding pens, which characters will enter this holding pen, this looping state of like something that's contextually relevant. Like we've designed these breakpoints like throughout the sequence. If they want to, like you say, washing up or like fixing a door or mending a car, or they're doing these tasks that would like they're intentionally designed that it makes sense that this character is spending 5 minutes doing this thing. And they kind of just saying, yeah, like we're not pressuring you to like get through this as quickly as you can. If you want to listen, you were saying about like maybe a siren in the background, or you heard a sound or something like this. Yeah, we want you to feel like there are things going on. Like we don't want to give you the sense that you're missing out on something, but we want you to explore and look around, but like safe in the fact that nothing critical is going to happen if I'm looking over here just because I'm curious. So it's that there's definitely a design philosophy thing that we try to take into Dahlia View.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jazz. That was definitely something I wanted to discuss, because I'm kind of like this adventure game person. I'm not good with the hand-eye coordination of games that require like a lot of time sequences or action sequences or jumping or anything. So the fact that you really do set your own pace with this game, I know it's supposed to be a thriller and it's supposed to be very tense, but the fact that the game is patient and it waits for you to find those things, and that made me feel more comfortable about exploring the environment and like really trying to investigate as thoroughly as possible. Really contributed to me enjoying that experience where I didn't feel like I was missing out, and it wasn't stressful in an unpleasant way.
Yeah. So it's from day one, it's kind of an intentional design. Like I don't personally engage with games that are trying to just make me play more of the game to kind of build up a level, or just kind of grind through something for the sake of doing it. I kind of bounce off those games, although I played a lot of Baldur's Gate 3, so I don't know what I'm talking about right now. But like essentially, from a design philosophy perspective, we don't put those into our games. So we've never had a game over state in any of our games, and we don't have you failed this section, restart this thing. We always just try and push you forward and keep it continuing. So even in a game like The Occupation, where it's an immersive simi game, you kind of stealth and you kind of break into stuff, security guards can catch you, but it's not like, oh, you have to reload from the last save. They take you aside and tell you off, say you shouldn't really be in here. It's kind of like you're a guest in our building. Like they kind of just tell you off in a literal way. The act that when I was saying before, where 1 minute in the game world is 1 minute in your world. Well, now you're in the middle of something and they've taken you over here to tell you off. Now, not only do you have to get back to this place, you've lost time by doing so, and that's the consequence. It's not like you failed, try this again. So we always just try to be on the side of the player. Like we understand that you're just trying to play the game at your own pace. Everyone has a different pace, and we don't just want arbitrary fail states for kind of like any kind of skill progression reason. It's kind of an intentional part of our design process there.
I'm just going to quickly say out loud in case anyone's listening while doing other stuff. If anyone watching has any questions, now's the time to ask, or forever hold your peace. Do you have anything that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I do have, I think I'm coming near the end of my questions, but one of the last questions I had was, yes, speaking of those failure states, are there multiple endings? I only got to play through the game once, so I'm just wanting to know what I'm missing.
Yeah, there's no multiple endings because again, we were saying that we kind of just wanted to tell this very clear story, wrap off the arcs, just try to just try to have the best possible experience. And there's like these optional, dialogue responses that you can pick, and there's like small things like this. But yeah, there was never, an intent behind creating multiple versions of this ending. We do have you know, like I said, secret endings in Ether 1, and we do have like multiple versions of endings. There's like 4 key endings, and then multiple versions of each of those 4 key endings in the occupation. And again, when I was saying each game is a reaction to that, like we did that, and we're just like that was fun and interesting. It reflects like the immersive simi kind of immersion nature of that game. It made sense to do multiple output narrative conclusions, but in Dahlia View, you know, everyone was having pretty similar to the same experience, so it didn't really make sense in the game. And again, it's kind of questioning those design assumptions like we were saying before, Julia. It's like, you know, you don't just want to jump onto the next game and just take these assumptions, and they may not fit into that design. So if we just thought, oh yeah, of course we do multiple endings, so let's just do them in this, it just wouldn't have made sense in something like Dahlia View, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's not a question, but just in case you don't have it up, Philippe wanted to say that they really like the my God, my language skills today. The deduction sections in the game, they really enjoyed those.
Yeah, we got a lot of. Oh, go ahead, Julia.
Oh no, the mechanism of synthesizing the information to create that theory was really, really, really cool. Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
Go ahead.
So Philippe said they got quite challenging, but I felt the opposite. I felt like the more I played it, the more detectory my brain got, and I was like, the first one, I was like, I ain't got a clue where. Like, what do you mean? This is evidence. I don't understand this. And then as the game got along, I used the hint thing a lot less. And by last one, I done it all by myself, and it made me feel clever, like I'm now a detective. But sorry, Pete.
No, and that's such a tough balance. Whether you're making puzzle games, I guess the same with like point and click adventure type of stuff. It's like giving the player, like they should have an idea of what they're trying to do, and the game acknowledges that. You don't want to like preempt the kind of aha moment or the understanding, but you need the game to acknowledge that somehow, that they've made the right connection. So such a difficult balance, but yeah, like we got some nice feedback from the detective board stuff, the kind of gameplay loop there of just like the summary of the level after you finish the level. So it's nice to know, especially like I don't know, like there's a couple of things as a designer I'm thinking where it's just like if you kind of bouncing off it at the start, that's not super ideal, but then, you know, is there an element of like you becoming a better detective? Definitely. And then it's also like, are you then understanding these kind of arbitrary rules that we kind of set for you in the game world, and you kind of understanding the formula? It's like such a difficult balance between like just understanding how the game works and like really just investing yourself in the role of this detective. But it's really nice to know that you, like, because we did feel like we needed a hint system there, because it's just like if people are kind of bouncing off it and getting super stuck, like again, we don't want people to just quit in frustration. We want to kind of still allow you to progress through. But it's nice to know that you know, that feedback became less needed as the game progressed, as you got more engaged with the characters and their motivations and things like this. Yeah, it's cool to hear.
Alan asks, it's actually quite an interesting question. Did it feel strange working on the game about neighbours watching neighbours from afar? Like, especially once lockdown started. I feel like if I was working in the studio, because I love the devs I work for, and I feel like work with, and I feel like if I had worked at your studio at that time, I would start watching my neighbours and being like, oh, I wonder what secrets they're up to. Yeah, how did that feel?
But I wasn't questioning that, but I don't live in the middle of a city. I don't live in like a high rise or anything like this. I didn't hear people, like we have a bunch of people in the studio that do live in like the center of Manchester and live in kind of communities like that. So I never heard anyone verbalize that. The thing that we are conscious on a serious level though is like our games can be dark. The next thing that we're working on is even darker, and so there is that kind of thing where it's just like, you know, working on these types of things, it can kind of like I don't know, you come away from your work and you think, wow, that was like quite a dark thing that we're doing. Because like I said, the next thing is like, a good multiplayer more than Dahlia View. So it'd be curious to know how people kind of resonate with that and land with it. But yeah, I mean, you just get invested in your work, don't you? And take it away and like, yeah, I can imagine like, if you're living in a complex similar to Dahlia View, it's like, yeah, you're like questioning yourself a bit more, just like I should close my blinds right now and stuff like this.
Yeah, and I feel like when I was playing, I really liked just Conway was like, hey, I'm watching you because I know that you done this bad thing, you stole this child, I know that you're a bad person, but actually some of them were bad depending on your view on ethics and stuff. But it's just so funny that the thing he was looking for he didn't find. Well, he did in the end, but he did find his neighbors just doing some very sus stuff. And I don't know why I like that. And it's like, does it make it okay to watch your neighbors if you think they're up to something? I'm a lot of ethics going on at the moment, like just the books I'm reading and studies I'm doing.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting game to play at the same time where I'm studying like stuff to do with ethics. And
Yeah.
again, not a question.
No, and again, it comes back to the kind of mission of the studio where we want to create games where the themes like leaving you with thoughts and questions like long after leaving the game world. Like I said, the occupation was very inspired by things like the Patriot Act in the US. We called ours the Union Act, and like around like the Ed Snowden kind of time. And we just like put these kind of things into our game, and they're just the things that we're talking about, discussing internally in the studio. And it's nice when you can have conversations, about a game that you're playing or a movie you're watching or anything like this. That, just causes you maybe to question something or have a more deeper discussion about. Like the amount of people who messaged us, like we got like one Kotaku review from Ether One that said, this game helped me deal with my father suffering with dementia. And we had people that were emailing saying, I was playing this with my kid, and my kid then started asking about their grandparents and wanting to know more about dementia. And like just making games that we know people are talking about after they've played them is like a very meaningful thing. And that's something we want to take into each game that we make.
I really want to ask about like what is the next game, but I know you're not going to tell me, so I won't bother.
Okay. Well,
we're currently locking the announcement like in the next couple of weeks. So you will see it. Yeah, I never want to put a time frame on it, but you'll see it soon, and I will share it with you.
But broadly speaking, I know you can't go into specifics, but you mentioned how each game is kind of like a reaction or a development from the previous one. Now, very vaguely, can you say what about Dahlia View that you are now responding to in terms of the design for the next one? You mentioned darker. Is there anything else you can just mention like that?
Yeah, of course. So there's a few things. There's well-paced story, but not everyone's story is the same. So there's a few pillars going on in the next game. So there's the kind of play your way aspect where like really deep narratives and just these shorter experiences, but like literally, Jazz, Julia, you can both play the game and you would just get very different things and say, oh, I love conversations where it's just like, oh, it was cool when we did this and we went to that place and found this thing. And Julia, maybe you said that, and then Jazz was like, wait, I never even went to that building. What are you talking about? And just like super deep narrative branches like that. I think I'm very interested in Ghost Story's new game, Judas. Ken Levine, who was on BioShock, is now making a game called Judas, and they have the framework of narrative Legos. And I think just modular narratives that can help react to player input is a very interesting thing for us. Nice that you said about the kind of wheelchair movement, Jazz, and like intuitive input is another key thing for us. Like when you're playing as these people, just make sure, again, Julia, you mentioned like you're not necessarily as engaged with like 3D peripheral space in 3D, and you're maybe more used to the 2D punch and click aspects or something like this. So it's just like onboarding new players that don't
Mhm.
necessarily play these kind of more narrative-driven games and make sure they can have that engagement experience from an input perspective, and just doubling down on thriller. I'd argue that, Dahlia View may not be definitely in that thriller vein. It maybe more mystery kind of thing, but we're doubling down on the kind of darker, kind of like British thriller aspect, and we don't think enough games are kind of made in that thriller genre. Sometimes they kind of blend into maybe horror. If they're a
Mhm.
dark thriller game, they might blend into horror. So we just want to really double down in that thriller genre. But yeah, we have a very exciting announcement. We've not timed it up for this stream or anything, but like in the next in the near term, shall I say, you'll see more from what we're working on. It's definitely like, we've elevated ourselves and put a lot of time into it. So very excited to share.
I'm both scared and
Mhm.
and very interested in I think what you were talking about, engaging like new people into games.
Yep.
I honestly, before this, like mystery was
Mhm.
never my type of game. And my only experience with narrative games before this is I used to work at Interior Night, who done
Yeah.
As Dusk Falls. And that
Yep.
was my first narrative uh, game. So playing this game was such a new experience.
Yeah.
It was so it was good.
Yeah.
It was the world building and the characters, and everything just felt so complex, just so detailed,
Yeah.
so thought out. Again, not a question. I need to start thinking of like questions at the
Well,
end of these statements.
I mean, it's a like when I've said that, I think Julia, you asked where the inspiration comes from, and so you should never start from like a market perspective, in my
Mhm.
opinion. Like it should be
Mhm.
like that seed of creativity. But like when you have that, it's just like, okay, who's the target audience, who's this market, and to get into kind of slightly more business territory, it's that we know that post COVID kind of boom of games, the market is not growing, and there's kind of play. The games industry needs to find more players, and I think people that don't necessarily consider themselves gamers or want to play games don't have games that they can necessarily find and engage with. And our belief is that as maybe uh, platforms become more accessible, whether it's the hardware or whether it's a streaming element where you can just turn on your TV and as easy as Netflix, that you can load up a movie, you can load up a game. There's just going to be a larger market of players that maybe they watch the BBC thrillers at home and they enjoy watching them with anyone that they're with, but they don't necessarily have a game equivalent of that. And we want to kind of target to the kind of that audience of players that really love either gripping dramas or deep thrillers that don't have the kind of game equivalent. Coming back to that, intuitive input, being able to onboard new players into this. So that's kind of the direction that we're wanting to go in. Yeah.
One of the other things I loved about the game is, you kind of mentioned it before. It felt so like being English. It felt so English. Like the pub, I just felt like I like walked in. I could smell the beer, and I'm like, I could just feel my wheels. They're not my wheels, but my wheels like stick. I could just imagine, and it's the way the world is built in the environment. You walk into Lady Darba's house. I know she's got a cleaner, but I could almost smell the mothballs. One of the questions that I didn't ask, I'm going to ask them, is I guess in terms of puzzles, like was there any that I don't know, that was like hard, that you thought was easy and there is actually harder, or is there any ones
Yeah.
that you thought was going to be really hard and then people playing it like, oh, this is easy? I realized we hadn't spoke about the puzzles really today, and I really enjoyed the puzzles. I really wanted to shine some light onto them.
Yeah, the thing about puzzles is you can like it's very hard to have like a linear curve of puzzle design in these kind of games, because you can't really start off with like the easy puzzle and then go to the hard puzzle, because they're also like contextual to the environment and designed around the gameplay space. That each puzzle is its own thing, and there's people's brains work in just different ways. Sometimes people just latch onto it straight away and their logic just gets them to the point, and sometimes people just bang their head against the wall where other people have had an easy time. Again, going back to a previous game like Ether 1, we had just all puzzles optional. So it's like this aspect, which again, so we put this in the Ether 1 10-year anniversary documentary that we filmed, so that's on our YouTube. But essentially, there was huge pushback in the team. Coming back to this kind of what when we were talking about like different departments bringing their own kind of creative contribution to the table, from a design perspective, I was just like, no, like I want to make these, and maybe Julia, from a point and click perspective, sometimes you can design these really deep, complex puzzles, and players have the patience. Players have the patience to dig into it and just really try and figure it out. Like classic adventure games, I think just have some great puzzle design. And so, like in Ether 1, I wanted to have these deep, complex, like little feedback in terms of puzzles when people got them, just like, yes, I figured it out. And so for that reason, I just said, yeah, all puzzles are optional. And there was a massive pushback about that and whether it was the right decision, but I kind of stuck to my guns, and it kind of worked out pretty well in Ether's perspective. And so when it came to Dahlia View, like I knew that we couldn't have kind of linear ramping up on puzzles. There was like a few of us designing the puzzles in Dahlia View, and so we tried to the main thing we tried to consider when doing puzzles is there's like, we call them gameplay verbs. I don't know if other people use that terminology, but like the actions that you have as a developer, try and have different types of puzzles for the different actions. So there's like, a wider spread. So there's not like just all these one types of puzzles in this area, and then you kind of change the flow just because it feels a bit too compartmentalized. So we try to create a lot of overlap in our puzzle design. Whether I don't think we saw players like struggling with one thing more than the other. I think maybe you brought up Lady Doa's house manor. Maybe that was hard for puzzle solving, especially with like the cryptex and things like this. I wasn't sure whether that was spoilery, but I don't think it's spoilery. But like some of like it might have been slightly more complex to figure out like the code for and things like this.
Oh, I feel really clever now. I got the cryptex. I was like, I get it. This is easy.
Yeah, I saw a few people struggling with that. That comes to mind, but and maybe the beer tap in Shirley Downs's, I think that stumbled a few people just because there was a bunch of back and forth with the beer taps in Shirley Downs's. But yeah, you just got to play test early, play test often. Just keep watching players, and again, sometimes you've got to have that friction there. You want the player to struggle a little bit to allow them to figure it out. Sometimes it's just arbitrary and unintuitive, and you just had a bad idea and you need to change it.
We've got 3 minutes. I really want to squish in one last question. That I can see in chat because I really like it.
Yes, me too.
So
yeah,
I can't believe that wasn't in my notes.
No, me either.
That's such a jazz question. So speaking of the pub, our friend the pigeon, who I named Fluffy, in my head I was like, Conway would probably name this pigeon useless, but you know what? I am going to name this pigeon Fluffy. How did Fluffy? Julia, what did you do? You remember?
Malcolm. Am I the only one who named the pigeon Malcolm?
No, I like it. I like it's like what you'd name a cat. That's not a cat's name. I like it. Yeah, but how did the Fluffy Malcolm useless get into the game?
Yeah, so this is actually something I like, a principle that I stole from Gone Home back in 2013. So Gone Home was a walking sim game made by Fulbright Company. And it was like one of those early walking simmy games alongside Dear Esther and things like this. Really strong narrative games. So if people like kind of first person narrative stuff, I'd check out Gone Home. But essentially it is like I can't remember the exact context, but there's this letter that you find, I think, and you're a daughter in the house. Your parents aren't home, and your family's gone missing. And so, like you're this person in the house. It's your house, and you find this love note from one of your parents to another parent. And when you hover over the note, it just says no or letter or something like that. And then when you look at it and you realize it's a love letter, the game's like, oh, parents love letter, and the game like screws it up and throws it, and it's like your personality being projected onto the gameplay interaction. I just thought that was such a like clever moment where something switched on. So we tried to add this element of like personalization to interactions or pickups, or like have something in one state in the game, but when you learn more context or you find something else out, you can just change the context of that, so that it can appear in like, you know, impactful ways and like ways that make sense for the story, but it can also just be fun. And if you want to name a pigeon, you can name a pigeon. And again, it's just like, you know, not everything has to be like super serious part of the, you know, the missing child's case. It's kind of a little bit of levity, and like there's small bits of like dark humor in there, and just like a little bit of light moments. I think you just need that in games like Dahlia View when it's about a missing child.
Yeah, it was nice. I'm gonna round off because it's time, but I'm gonna give you I guess a minute. Yeah, you've got a game coming out, and
Yep.
maybe use this time to like plug it. Why not? Plug your studio, plug your next game. Or when's the announcement? Tell us.
So not going to say when the announcement is, because it's that
Oh, you
age-old
don't.
thing
Yes,
of
that's right. Yeah.
promising announcement. Like it is coming soon. We've been working hard on it. We're doing a bunch of things at the studio that we're very excited. We're not just doing one thing; we're doing multiple things. So yeah, the best way to stay up to date, just follow us on one of our socials, White Paper Games. You can jump onto our Discord. We're not like super socially active just because we put a lot of time into our games. We don't have like dedicated community people on our team, but it's something, you know, we are trying to engage with and chat to the players more. And if you just jump on our Discord and want to ask us questions, we're there and we're happy to respond. But we're not necessarily two-player facing at the moment. But when we've got more stuff to shout about in the very near term future, you know, hopefully you'll be able to check out the trailer and see what we're up to soon.
Amazing. And that is this month's game. Julia, thank you so much for being my co-host.
Pleasure.
You are a beautiful balance to my nonsense. Pete, it has been brilliant, and thank you for sharing the insights, like knowledge you have. Obviously, of the game is just amazing to listen to, and how it all came together. And I really enjoyed listening to, I guess, the morals of the studio and how you make games is completely different, I guess, from what we've seen before, but that's what makes games amazing, right? It's different people making different games and touching different people, and this is why we love what we do. But I'm 2 minutes over. I don't want to get sacked, so I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you for having me as well. I love everything that Into Games does, so thank you for having me.
We love you, Into Games, not just because you pay me.
You.
See you next week. No, live next month. Bye.